Welcome to a story about the night I learned the difference between attention and respect. He tossed $1 at me in the middle of a crowded party and said, "I'll take care of it tonight." Everyone laughed. And in that moment, I had two choices: become the joke or become the lesson. I picked up the dollar, not because I needed it, but because I needed to remember that feeling. The next day, he realized he should have never thrown it. If you believe silence can be more powerful than revenge, if you believe glow-ups speak louder than arguments, make sure you subscribe. Because some stories aren't about heartbreak, they're about awakening. He didn't throw the dollar hard. That's what made it worse. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even passion. It was casual, effortless, like he was flicking away a crumb from the table. The music was loud, bass vibrating through the floor, colored lights washing over faces that were half drunk and fully entertained. I remember holding a red plastic cup, laughing at something someone said, feeling almost comfortable for once in a room that didn't always feel like mine. And then his voice cut through everything. "I'll take care of her tonight." The dollar floated before it landed near my feet. For a split second, I didn't understand. My brain refused to process what had just happened. People around us reacted faster than I did. There were snickers, a sharp laugh. From somewhere behind me, someone said, "Oh," like it was a scene from a reality show. A few phones tilted slightly upward, not fully obvious, but enough. Enough to capture whatever was about to happen next. My cheeks burned before I could even name the feeling. It wasn't just embarrassment. It was exposure, like someone had peeled something private off of me and pinned it to a wall for display. The way he said it, confident, amused, like he was doing me a favor, made it clear that this wasn't about care. It was about control. It was about performance. He didn't look at me like I was a person in that moment. He looked at me like I was a punchline. I searched the faces around us, hoping someone would say something. A friend, a stranger, anyone. But people avoid discomfort like it's contagious. No one wants to be the one who ruins the vibe. So they smiled awkwardly, or pretended they didn't really hear it, or laughed, just enough to stay neutral. And that silence from everyone else, it was louder than his words. I felt suddenly small, like the room had expanded and I had shrunk inside it. My outfit, which I had felt confident in an hour ago, now felt too tight, too loud, too visible. I became hyper-aware of everything: my posture, my expression, where my hands were. I didn't want to look hurt. That would make it worse. I didn't want to look angry. That would make me dramatic. So I did the only thing I could think of. I froze. He smirked, probably expecting me to flirt back, to play along, to turn humiliation into humor. That's what girls are trained to do, right? Laugh it off. Be cool. Don't make it awkward. Don't be sensitive. Don't ruin the party. For a second, I almost did. I almost forced a smile. I almost said something witty to regain control of the moment. But something inside me shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet crack in the way I saw him. Because respect doesn't humiliate you for entertainment, and care doesn't announce itself like ownership. The dollar lay there between us, thin and wrinkled against the hardwood floor. It wasn't about the money. It was about what it symbolized: a transaction, a purchase, a suggestion that I could be claimed with pocket change and a loud enough voice. That's when I realized something else. He wasn't just testing me. He was measuring how much I would tolerate. The crowd moved on quickly. Someone turned the music up louder. A new conversation sparked near the kitchen. The world kept spinning like nothing had happened. But inside me, everything had slowed down. I felt detached, like I was watching the scene from above, watching myself standing there, trying to hold my dignity in a room that had just tried to strip it. I bent down, not dramatically, not angrily, just calmly. I picked up the dollar. The room went quieter than before, because now they were waiting for the reaction, waiting for the explosion, waiting for the scene. But I didn't give him one. I folded the dollar once, then again smoothed it between my fingers. My face was neutral, even though my chest felt tight. I met his eyes not with softness, not with flirtation, not with tears. used clarity. In that moment, I saw him clearly for the first time. Not charming, not confident, just insecure enough to need an audience. He laughed, like it was still a joke, like I was still part of it. But something had already ended for me. Not loudly, not publicly, just internally. Because the most painful part wasn't the dollar. It was realizing that the person who claimed he liked me, who texted me good morning, who called me beautiful in private, was comfortable reducing me in public for approval. That's what hurt. The disrespect wasn't accidental. It was deliberate. It was packaged as humor, delivered as dominance, and disguised as attraction. And everyone saw it, including me. And once you see something like that, you can't unsee it. I didn't say anything. That was the part that confused people later. They expected fireworks, a drink thrown in his face, a sharp comeback that would slice through the music and make everyone gasp. They expected drama because that's what public humiliation usually demands, a public reaction. But I didn't give them one. After I picked up the dollar and folded it between my fingers, I looked at him for a second longer than necessary, not to challenge him. Not to plead, just to memorize the expression on his face. That careless grin, that satisfaction of having everyone's attention. That confidence that I would stay. Then I turned and walked away. The music kept playing. Conversations resumed. Someone brushed past me without even noticing the shift that had just happened inside my chest. I moved through the crowd slowly, calmly, like I was just going to refill my drink or step outside for air. But I wasn't. I was leaving. Every step toward the door felt heavier than it should have. Not because I wanted to stay, but because walking away meant accepting something I didn't want to admit yet. It meant acknowledging that what happened wasn't harmless. It wasn't flirting. It wasn't playful teasing. It was disrespect. And sometimes the hardest thing isn't confronting someone. It's confronting the truth about them. Outside, the night air hit my skin and I finally exhaled. I didn't realize I had been holding my breath the entire time. The bass from inside the house thumped faintly through the walls, but out there it felt distant, like it belonged to another world. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, staring at the dollar still folded neatly in my hand. I could have dropped it, thrown it into the street, let it blow away, but I didn't. Because it wasn't just a dollar anymore. It was evidenced. Evidence of the exact moment I saw him clearly. I replayed the scene in my head, his tone, the way people laughed, the way no one stepped in. I thought about how easily he said it, how natural it sounded coming from his mouth. That's what hurt the most. There was no hesitation, no second thought, as if reducing me to something he could take care of for the night was normal. And maybe in his world, it was. I walked to my car without rushing. I didn't want to look dramatic if anyone happened to glance outside. I didn't want to give him the satisfaction of thinking he'd upset me enough to run. So I moved with control. That was the only thing I had left in that moment. Control over my exit. Inside the car, the silence felt loud. The kind of silence that forces you to sit with your thoughts whether you're ready or not. My phone buzzed almost immediately. A text from him. Where'd you go? No apology. No acknowledgement. Just confusion that I had removed myself from the stage he created. I stared at the screen. Another buzz. Relax. It was a joke. That word. Joke. It's amazing how often disrespect hides behind humor. How quickly people dismiss your feelings by accusing you of not being able to take one. I didn't respond. Instead, I placed the dollar in the empty space near my cup holder and started the engine. My hands were steady, but my chest felt tight. Not because I missed him. Not because I was afraid he'd be upset, but because I was disappointed. Disappointed in him. Disappointed myself for not seeing sooner what was always there in smaller ways. The subtle comments, the possessive tone masked as protection. The way he liked attention more than he liked connection. The drive home was quiet. Street lights blurred past the windshield, and with each one, the embarrassment faded a little, replaced by something else. Clarity. I realized that if I had stayed, I would have been agreeing. If I had laughed it off, I would have been confirming that I was okay with being treated like entertainment. If I had argued in front of everyone, I would have still been participating in his performance. Leaving was the only move that wasn't part of his script. When I got home, I didn't cry immediately. That surprised me. I thought humiliation was supposed to come with tears. Instead, I felt calm. Not numb, just aware. Aware that the version of him I liked wouldn't have done that. Aware that the version of me who tolerated it didn't exist anymore. My phone buzzed again. Missed call. Another text. You're being dramatic. That sealed it. Because the right person doesn't call you dramatic for protecting your dignity. I picked up the dollar from my car before going inside. I smoothed it out again under the kitchen light. It looked ordinary. Worn. Creased at the edges. So small for something that carried so much weight. I placed it on my dresser. Not as a reminder of him, but as a reminder of the feeling. The heat in my cheeks. The silence of the crowd. The sound of my own footsteps walking away. That night wasn't about losing him. It was about finding the boundary I didn't know I had. And once you walk away quietly like that, something shifts inside you. You realize you don't have to scream to make a statement. Sometimes the loudest thing you can do is leave without saying a word. The house was quiet when I got home, but my mind wasn't. It replayed everything in sharp detail, like a scene stuck on repeat. His voice, the laughter, the way the dollar hit the floor. I had walked away with control, with dignity, with silence. But now there was no music to drown it out, no crowd to perform strength for, just me and the truth sitting across from each other in the dark. I placed the dollar on my nightstand and sat on the edge of my bed. It looked harmless there, small, insignificant, but it carried the weight of a moment that shifted something inside me. At first, I tried to minimize it. Maybe I was maybe it really was just a joke. Maybe I was being too sensitive. Those thoughts came quickly, almost automatically, like they had been trained to defend him before they defended me. But then I replayed his tone again in my head. It wasn't playful, it wasn't affectionate. It was performative. It was loud enough for everyone to hear. It was meant to get a reaction, not from me, from them. And that's when it started to sink in. He wasn't trying to connect with me. He was trying to impress an audience. I lay back against my pillows and stared at the ceiling. The embarrassment came in waves now. Not sharp, but heavy. Not just because of what he said, but because of how easily it happened. How natural it felt to him. How no one questioned it. I thought about the way he sometimes introduced me to people. The way he'd wrap his arm around me a little too tightly when other men were around. The way he liked to say things like, "Don't worry, I got her." As if I were something fragile or owned. I used to think it was protective, confident, attractive, even. Now it felt different. Now it felt like positioning. That night wasn't an isolated moment. It was just the loudest version of something that had been whispering for a while. I turned onto my side and grabbed my phone. No new messages. No apology. No, I'm sorry if that embarrassed you. Just silence on his end now. The kind of silence that waits for you to break first. I imagined what he was probably thinking. That I'd cool off. That I'd text him in the morning. That I'd explain why I left. That I'd smooth it over so things could go back to normal. But normal suddenly didn't feel safe. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. It wasn't just about a dollar or a comment. It was about how easily he'd reduced me to something transactional. Something temporary. Something he could take care of for the night. Like it was a casual decision. The wording mattered. Not I care about her. Not she's with me. But I'll take care of her. Tonight. Disposable. Limited. Almost like a rental agreement. My chest tightened at that realization, because affection should feel steady. It shouldn't sound like a time slot. I got up and walked to the mirror. I looked at myself, really looked. The same face he complimented. The same girl he texted good morning. The same person who listened to his problems and supported his goals. And yet, in a room full of people, he turned me into a spectacle. That's when the sadness shifted into something else. Not anger. Not yet. Clarity. I realized I had been shrinking in small ways for a while. Laughing at jokes that weren't funny. Ignoring comments that felt slightly off. Telling myself that confidence sometimes looks like arrogance. That teasing is normal. That public attention is flattering. But respect doesn't blur lines. Respect is consistent in private and in public. The night stretched on, but I didn't cry. I expected tears, but what I felt instead was a steady unraveling of illusion. The version of him I liked started to fade, replaced by the version I saw clearly under party lights. And the more I thought about it, the more one question repeated in my mind. If this is how he treats me when people are watching, how does he truly see me when they're not? That question sat heavy, because love, or whatever this was, should make you feel elevated, not evaluated. I picked up the dollar again and held it between my fingers. It felt almost symbolic now, a test, a measure of how much self-respect I was willing to trade for attention. And I knew something quietly but firmly in that moment. If I let this slide, it wouldn't be the last time. Disrespect grows when it's excused. I lay back down and closed my eyes. But sleep didn't. Not because I missed him, not because I wanted him to call, but because I was mourning the version of the story I thought we had. The potential, the hope, the idea that maybe he saw me as something lasting. Instead, he showed me something fleeting. By the time the sky outside my window started to lighten, I felt different. Not louder, not hardened, just awake in a way I hadn't been before. The humiliation had transformed into understanding, and understanding is dangerous for people who rely on you staying blind. The morning after felt unnaturally calm. Sunlight filtered through my curtains like nothing had shifted, like the world hadn't quietly rearranged itself overnight. For a moment, I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, letting the stillness settle into me. The humiliation from the party wasn't sharp anymore. It had transformed into something steadier, something colder. My phone was on my nightstand. I already knew there would be messages. When I picked it up, there they were. 3 missed calls. A string of texts. Why did you leave? You're overthinking it. It was just a joke. And finally, hours later, call me. No apology. No ownership, just irritation dressed as confusion. I read them slowly, not with tears in my eyes this time, but with a strange sense of distance. It was like watching someone reveal themselves in high definition. Every word confirmed what I had already realized during the long night. He wasn't sorry. He was annoyed that I hadn't played my role. I didn't respond, not out of pettiness, not to punish him, but because I suddenly understood that explanations are wasted on people who already decided they did nothing wrong. The urge to reply was there, to defend myself, to explain why it hurt, to describe how it felt standing there while everyone laughed. I could have written paragraphs about dignity and respect and how words matter. But I paused, because if I had to explain basic respect to him, then he was never offering it in the first place. Another text came through. You're really going to ignore me? That one almost made me smile, not because it was funny, but because it was predictable. The shift had begun. The confidence from the night before was gone. The performance was over. Now, there was only ego bruised by silence. Silence is uncomfortable for people who rely on reaction. I sat up in bed and took a deep breath. My heart wasn't erasing anymore. There was no dramatic storm inside me, just clarity moving quietly through my thoughts. I opened our message thread and scrolled up. All the good mornings, all the late night conversations, the compliments, the emojis. The plans we casually talked about, it looked warm. It looked promising, but one moment can reframe everything. I realized something important. If I responded now, I would be teaching him that humiliation only costs a small conversation, that he could cross a line publicly and fix it privately with a few words. And some lines shouldn't be easy to erase. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. Then I locked my phone. No speech, no dramatic send-off, no we're done paragraph. Just silence. An hour later, he called again. I watched it ring. Letting it ring wasn't easy. Part of me wanted closure. Part of me wanted him to feel the weight of what he did. But closure doesn't always come from confrontation. Sometimes it comes from decision, and I had already decided. I opened my settings. His contacts stared back at me, a name that, until yesterday, made my stomach flutter. Now it just looked ordinary, replaceable. I blocked the number. The action itself was small. One tap, one confirmation, but the shift it represented was massive. Blocking him wasn't about anger. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't a dramatic exit meant to hurt him. It was protection. Protection of my peace, my dignity, my future self, who would thank me for not negotiating with disrespect. After I'd blocked him, the room felt quieter. Not empty, not lonely. Just settled. There's something powerful about not announcing your departure. Not posting cryptic quotes. Not updating your status. Not trying to make someone jealous. Just disappearing from access. I didn't post anything that day. No glamorous selfie. No subtle shade. No new beginnings caption. I went about my day normally. Made coffee. Answered emails. Cleaned my room. But inside, something was reorganizing. I realized that the real power move wasn't embarrassing him back. It wasn't returning the dollar in front of a crowd. It wasn't crafting the perfect speech to make him feel small. The real power move was indifference, because humiliation thrives on reaction. And I refused to feed it. As the day went on, I wondered if he was confused, if he was replaying the night the way I had, if he expected me to cool down and reach out. But I didn't wonder with longing. I wondered with distance. For the first time, I saw the dynamic clearly, the subtle control, the way he liked to position himself as the chooser, the protector, the one in charge. By walking away without explanation, I disrupted that balance. He didn't get to take care of me. He didn't get to fix it. He didn't get to narrate what happened. I chose myself quietly, and that choice felt stronger than any argument I could have made. By evening, my phone was still silent. No new numbers trying to reach me. No apologies sent through mutual friends. Just stillness. And in that stillness, I felt something unexpected. Not heartbreak. Not rage. Just self-respect settling into place, like it had been waiting for me to finally claim it. Sometimes the most unexpected shift isn't in how someone else changes. It's in realizing you no longer need them to. A week passed, and the world didn't collapse the way I once thought it might. If I ever walked away from someone I cared about. The sun still rose. My phone still buzzed, with notifications that had nothing to do with him. Life continued, steady and indifferent. But inside me, something had sharpened. The dollar was still on my dresser. I hadn't thrown it away. I hadn't spent it. I hadn't returned it. It stayed there, flattened and quiet. No longer humiliating, just symbolic. It had transformed from insult to reminder. At first, I kept it because I didn't want to forget how that moment felt. The heat in my face, the silence of the crowd, the realization that I was standing next to someone who didn't value me the way I valued myself. But as the days passed, the meaning shifted. It stopped representing him. It started representing the boundary. I began noticing subtle changes in myself. I stood a little straighter when I walked into rooms. I paid attention to the way people spoke to me, not just what they said, but how they said it. Tone, timing, intent. I'd learned that disrespect doesn't always shout. Sometimes it laughs. Friends eventually asked what happened, why I wasn't answering his calls, why we weren't showing up together anymore. I didn't give dramatic details. I didn't tell the story like gossip. He simply sighed. I realized I deserved better, and that was enough. I heard through mutual friends that he was confused, that he sighed, he took it too seriously, that he didn't understand why I blocked him over one joke. That part almost made me smile, because it was never about one joke. It was about the mindset behind it. It was about the comfort he had in reducing me publicly. It was about the assumption that I would accept whatever version of him showed up. He expected me to come back, to miss him, to soften. To text late at night was something vulnerable that reopened the door. But something had changed to me that night at the party. Humiliation is a strange way of clarifying things. It strips illusions quickly. It forces you to ask yourself uncomfortable questions. Why did I allow certain comments before? Why did I mistake possessiveness for protection? Why did I ignore the subtle moments that felt slightly off? Growth isn't loud. It doesn't always announce itself with dramatic speeches or revenge plans. Sometimes it shows up as quiet discipline, as a refusal, as standards you no longer negotiate. One evening, I picked up the dollar again and looked at it under the light. I thought about how easily he tossed it, how casual the flick of his wrist was, how confident he felt in that moment, and I realized something important. He thought he was choosing me, but I was the one who decided whether I stayed. That shift in perspective was everything. I didn't need to embarrass him back. I didn't need to confront him in front of everyone. I didn't need to prove my worth with arguments or explanations. The glow-up people talk about isn't always external. It isn't always a new haircut, a new wardrobe, or curated photos online. Sometimes it's internal alignment. I started pouring my energy into things that felt solid. My work, my goals, my friendships. I showed up for myself the way I used to show up for him, consistently, attentively, fully. And the more I invested in myself, the smaller that party moment felt. Not because it didn't matter, but because it no longer defined me. One afternoon, I ran into someone who had been at the party. There was a flicker of recognition in their eyes, like they were trying to see if I was still the girl from that night. I smiled, calm, unbothered. The power in that moment wasn't in pretending it didn't hurt. It was in knowing I walked away when it did. Eventually, I took the dollar and placed it inside a journal. Between two blank pages, not as a wound, but as a marker. A timestamp in my life that said, "This is where you stopped accepting less." I didn't need him to regret it to feel validated. I didn't need a public apology. I didn't need closure handed to me in perfect wording. The closure was in the decision. The real twist of the story isn't that he lost me. It's that I found myself. And once you experience the quiet strength of choosing dignity over attention, you don't go back. You don't shrink to fit someone else's ego. You don't laugh at jokes that cost you self-respect. You don't stay where you're displayed instead of valued. He tossed a dollar like I was temporary. What he didn't realize was that the moment he did, he made himself temporary in my life. And that's a lesson no one in that room saw coming. So, if there's one thing I want you to take from my story, it's this. The moment someone disrespects you publicly is not the moment you lose. It's the moment you see. You see who they are. You see what they value. And most importantly, you see what you will no longer tolerate. He thought he embarrassed me that night, but what he really did was wake me up. Because sometimes the most painful moments aren't meant to break you. They're meant to introduce you to your standards. And walking away quietly, that wasn't weakness. That was self-respect, choosing itself. If you've ever been laughed at, underestimated, or treated like an option, remember this. You don't need to argue. You don't need to prove. You don't need to perform. You just need to decide. And once you decide, everything changes. If this message spoke to you, if you believe in choosing dignity over attention, if you're done shrinking for people who don't value you, make sure you subscribe and be part of this journey. Because here, we don't chase validation. We choose ourselves.